Nau mai haere mai ki te aka Māori. Welcome to the Rotorua Library. Thank you very much for being here to hear about our presentation today. This is just one part of many presentations and sessions that we'll be holding here at the library. If you are interested in learning what other ones there are, then please just check our council website. So the order of the proceedings tonight is that we will, I'll set the scene a little bit on what housing for tomorrow is, then we'll hand over to our guest speaker, Te Taru White, and then we also have a video presentation from Te Arawa Lakes Trust from Nicky, so she unfortunately wasn't able to make it here tonight. But I do want to acknowledge a couple people in the room. First of all, our staff who have put a lot of effort into not only the housing work in general, but also into getting this presentation so we can help inform our public. Thank you very much to you for taking the time to come here on this evening. And I also want to acknowledge our other councillors in the room who are Councillor Reynold McPherson, Councillor Fisher Wang, Councillor Sandra Kaifong, Councillor Mercia Yates, so a lot of us if you want to ask us questions, and also our chairperson of the Rural Community Board, Shirley Trumper. To sort of set the scene, as many of you will know, Rotorua has been dealing with quite the housing crisis. It's becoming a bit of a hot topic for all the wrong reasons actually. So evidence shows that our city here in Rotorua does have a severe lack of homes, and council is working with urgency to respond to that demand. So Rotorua is growing and changing. That's a very different picture to maybe 10 years ago or so, and Jean-Paul Gaston, our Deputy Chief Executive of District Development, spoke to that as well. So if you do want to know any more about the demographics, about the facts and the evidence that we've collated, that presentation from Jean-Paul will actually be, is on our website now, I believe, so live for you to look at. So please have a look and share that information. We will continue to change, and we do need to be ready and act now. So our community now has an opportunity to plan for the future that enables our city to grow in a way that protects but also enhances the things we love. That's our job at the Rotorua Lakes Council. So we don't want to be a victim of this growth. We want it to be an opportunity. And the housing crisis is universal. It's not unique to Rotorua, but we're feeling that across the country. So we are in a good position to act now, and the best thing that we can do is act as quickly as possible. So we are doing that. So we're learning from other cities, but housing has become Council's #1 priority. So our role is to enable and encourage growth, and also to build partnerships with those who can actually deliver on what we need to do to help our community to thrive. So I'm grateful to have our partners of Te Tata o Te Arawa and also Te Arawa Lakes Trust presenting just one of the many things that they do for the community as well. So we can't do this alone. We do need to work together to help Rotorua to reach our potential, to be a great place to live, work, play and invest. And that's our kaupapa, that's our focus here. So we want people who love Rotorua to be involved in these plans. So thank you very much for being here. We will have times for questions after, and we also do have a number of consultation items that are going to be on the website too. So we'll put as much information out there as we can, and please feel free to share that with others who may want to share their voice or make a submission on it as well. So we do importantly want to acknowledge the partnering with mana whenua on these topics. Council is committed to working together to ensure that the values and principles of Te Arawa underpin our conversations about growth, about housing, and importantly, the wellbeing and the environment. So just a quick look at our agenda. Last week you heard about our vision and our plan, what Rotorua for Tomorrow is all about. We looked at that evidence, and I'd like to thank and also shortly invite up Te Taru White. So amongst other things, Te Taru is the chairman of Te Tātou o Te Arawa, and that is the Te Arawa partnership between our local iwi and Rotorua Lakes Council. So the aim of that was to strengthen both entities and our relationships with each other. So Te Tātou o Te Arawa, our Council Iwi Partnership Board, was established in 2015 and is on a mission to serve and represent Te Arawa whānui and to work in partnership with Rotorua Lakes Council to create and foster a high trust environment so that we can achieve better outcomes, including enhanced socio-economic and cultural prosperity for Te Arawa, for Māori in general, and importantly, the wider community of the Rotorua district. As I mentioned, unfortunately, Nicky Douglas isn't able to be here from Te Arawa Lakes Trust, but she does have an excellent presentation and video. So we'll hand over to Te Taru, hold any questions that you have for him until the end of his presentation, and once we've got through your questions, we'll then go to our video with Nicky, which will take about 10 minutes. So without further ado, welcome Te Taru White.
Tēnā rata tō katoa. Tuatahi mihana ki a koe e te rangati mō tō tātou, mō tō mihi, me tō tātou karikia i tēnei pō. Kei te mihatu ki a koe. Me koe hoki e te kaiwhakahaere mō tēnei huihuinga Tania. Kei te mihatu ki a koe hoki. E ngā mana ngā reo, te arawa waka, te arawa tangata, ngā mana whenua mō tēnei whenua tapu, e ngā karangatanga hapu, tēnei te mihatu ki a koutou. E ngā memo te kaunihere o ngā rotorua, ngā kai tautoko, ngā kai mahi, me ngā memo te hapori e hui mai nei i tēnei pō. A kei te mihi, a kei te mihi, a kei te mihi atu ki a koutou. A ko te taru wairahau, ko au te tiamana mo tatau o te arawa, i te taha tōku māma no te arawa Ngāti Pikiao, me tainui Ngāti Mahanga, i te taha tōku pāpā no Ngāti Parau, te whānau rua taupare me te whānau hene tāpora. Nō reira tēnā koutou, a tēnā koutou, a tēnā koutou katoa. Nau mai haramai ki tēnei whakātūranga, te matakite o te arawa rua mano rima takau, te arawa Vision 2050. Mauri tū, Mauri ora, oho te arawa oho te arawa oho ko te whakariki, ko te whakariki. Waha tuku a mai ki a piri, tuku a mai ki a ta. Taha kia e ke mai, ki runga ki te pai pai, poto a hau mai ta whiti. Mauri tū, Mauri ora, stand and live the best life. Te arawa e. You heard me mention the name Hau Mai Tawhiti. Next slide. Now, Hau Mai Tawhiti, I'll talk to that. Hau Mai Tawhiti was our eponymous ancestor who farewelled our Te Arawa waka from Hawaii those many, many years ago. And in that, he chanted incantations, and in those incantations and farewell to his people on that particular canoe, he shared with them the values and prosperities and who they are as a people, and to hold strong no matter what the changes of the future may be. Be brave, be strong, take those challenges on board. And so with that, those values setting, our people sought new lands and settled in Aotearoa around 1300, AC, after, whatever. Anyway, with that said, can I have the next slide? We started looking at a Vision 2050 that premised the words of Hau Mai Tawhiti, that anchored on the words of Hau Mai Tawhiti and the values that make us who we are, values that we shall never forget. It's like any other business, actually. If you stray from your core values, you will collapse. We have tended to do that to a degree, and there are reasons for that. But we are now reconciling with those value sets, and we will forward them into our future. We started with a blank canvas, and it's up there. It's a blank canvas initially, and said, well, Te Arawa was wanting us to provide some vision, some future direction. That was a pretty unique request, really, because not many tribes can easily come together, because they are so, in many ways, quite disparate, quite separate. But the need for unity, the need for kotahitanga is hugely important in being able to garner and create a future for us all. A future where we as all, as a community, can benefit as well from a collective of people who act together, work together, and love the place they've come from. So with that said, we set about setting up a process to forge a Vision 2050 for our people, and I would argue for our community at large. These are all the entities, and this was started in 2019, quite some time ago. 18 months in the making of all of these people being on board to discuss this future we were talking about. The consultation process that we engage with is a consultation process that sets the benchmark for consultation, right? Sets the benchmark for transparency, sets the benchmark for co-creation and co-design. This is what happened. Next slide. These are all the things that we did in that 18 months. You can see the number of surveys, the number of elders that were interviewed, the rangatahi that were interviewed, the stuff on websites, social media, the works. It's all there. That's a very, very impressive list. You won't see any government agencies going to that extent. So we valued consultation, we valued maintaining the integrity of this vision, and it can only have honest intent if our people were involved, co-created and co-designed. And if they came together on the concepts of hau mai tawhiti, then we will thrive and we'll live up to Modi 2, Modi order. That was the strength of our beginnings in this particular space. So in June, we circulated a draft document in June 2020. We circulated a draft document for people to comment upon. So there was lots of input. Next slide, please. So in July 2020, we had the great delight to launch the vision at Te Puia, to launch it. And in that space there, you can see some of the people enjoying the occasion. It was an honour to be able to celebrate it with them as the chair of Tātou Te Arawa. As Tania said, we take our obligations to work in partnership with the council seriously, but we also take our obligations to connect with our people, to make sure our people are the voices behind us before we move. And so we were able to celebrate with great excitement this launch of our 2050 vision. Next slide. So enjoy. This is about 5 minutes and it'll give you a really nice picture of the evolution of the words of hau mai tawhiti.
Hau mai tawhiti admonishes his sons to leave from Hawaii and find new land, new life, strive for peace. He leaves them with his words of encouragement. Tamate Kapua embarks for Aotearoa. These are part of hau mai tawhiti's words as a reminder to his descendants to overcome, to find peace, and strive to do and be your best.
Mai te vivia, mai te rawea, tūro parea tangaroa. Bind all in the world of light to the world unseen. Become one with the movements of tangaroa. Te ororo I te oromia, I tuki tuki ai koe, I tatai ai koe. The fashioning and rubbing, the to and the fro, moulding you. Oi kiri o tangaroa, oi tere te waka nei, tere a ngaia. Oh, to the surface of the ocean. Oh, ensure the safe passage of this canoe, the sailing to be direct. Tūtaki ki tēnei mānuka, tūtaki ki tēnei ngā hoa. Overcome all obstacles faced, overcome any barriers witnessed. Tupu te mahara, tupu ki roto. Kia hono koe ko te hono tawhita. Let it grow, the thought within, to bind with the antediluvian. Pūrea o taringa, kia turi a kia hoi. Koe whakarongo koe ki te kōrero iti. Ko te kōrero iti, Katahuri nā ko te hau ai tū. Cleanse your ears to be deafened. Refrain from hearing things insignificant. Such things will guarantee nothing but calamity. Ki hai koe te kanohi I titira. Ko te taringa te whakaronga. Let your eyes see not, and your ears acknowledge not. O tama, o tia, o oro, o hei, o maka. E mau koutou ki tai, ki tai, ki tai, ki noho. Waiho he huhu, he popo, he hane hane. E ai te mate kia mate tarawhare. Go to the new land and forever live in peace. Let old age be the instrument of death, the death of honor. Mehe mea ka mau ki tai, ki tai, ki tai, ki tū. Ka mau tonu ki riri. He puia. He hāngina. E kore e roko hanga e koutou. E kore ai te mate. Seek not the path of the war god too, for he fills only the earth oven of remorse. Your death will be tainted and young.
Explains it a bit better than I could. But some words of wisdom from the past that our people are trying to connect with, endeavouring to connect with, in the best interests of all of us. So these are the departing words of Hau Mai Tawhiti that have set the scene for our strategic vision for the future. Larry, this was his first strategic vision for Te Arawa when he left. You know, these words are very, very powerful signals for us in our future. Okay? And they were explained in that particular video clip very nicely. Next word. So when we're talking about Te Arawa, what are we talking about? Who are we talking about? In this particular situation, our line, if you like, of extent, mai makatu ki tongarero, mai tongarero ki makatu. The prow of the canoe rests at Makatu, where we landed on the coast. The bow of the canoe rests in Tongariro, Mount Tongariro. And the tākere rests in the Waiariki of Rotorua, the hull, the centre of that hull. So that's our canoe. Okay, now our cousins from Ngāti Tūwharetoa, next slide. That's the extent of our territory. We go to the north of Taupo there. And basically, but we do not impinge upon the territories of Ngāti Tūwharetoa, who are part of our waka as well. So our Vision 2050 extends to all of those 50 odd iwi and many more hapu in that jurisdiction you see in the shaded area. One day we will, and I know that Te Ariki Nui Tumuti Huhiu is very keen on uniting our waka, mai makatu ki tongariro. So Tūwharetoa and the rest of us whanaunga from Te Arawa will come together to develop that greater extent of our vision. Next. So Mauri tū, Mauri ora, Te Arawa air is the vision statement. Stand tall, stand and live. There is another saying amongst our people, tama tū, tama ora, tama noho, tama mate. If you lie down, you will die. If you stand up, you will live. In a sense, this is telling our people to stand up, face all of those challenges that Hau Mai Tawhiti perceived would be before us. Be brave in that space. And that's what I mean about transformational change from the thinking of depression, from the thinking of oppression to a new way of thinking about development and not grievance. Those are really, really important value constructs for our people moving forward, and dare I say, contributors to this wonderful city of ours and region of ours and country of ours. So, next slide. So these are all the matapono, or the values that have been constructed, as you would have heard, a bit more detail behind them. As land remains, people perish. Meaning that, you know, the land is here forever. We must protect the land. We must look after the land. We must nurture the land. Not give it a hiding like many places are at the moment. A human being is precious. Ia hata me nui o te ao, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. Without people flourishing, who are we? What are we? What do we have? We have nothing. Seeds nurtured by the sacred waters, being able to grow ourselves in this space, be able to nurture our next generations, our new populations of the future, our children, our mokopuna. Look, there's a few grey hairs around here, you know, baby boomers and maybe before, who really, you start thinking about your future generations, not about you, but about your children and your mokopuna. I know I'm in that space. I know my kids keep kicking me and blaming me for a number of things being a baby boomer. But the one thing we want to do is leave this life better than what we received it. A small wedge which fell the great forest, which means there's nothing that we can't challenge and defeat. If we get ourselves together, get our act together, and we work off these values, there is nothing we cannot achieve. The values treasured by our elders, the wisdom. You know, I know, as I said, I get it from my children. You know, Dad, when are you going to retire? You know, hey, old fella, move on. The reality of life experience is not to be undervalued. There is a time when you need to move on. But that life experience, mixed with the challenges of our new generations, the technologies they bring, the verve they bring, and importantly, it's their lives we're deciding upon. So bringing the two together is the ideal space for us all. Many hands make light work. Well, you know, I mean, the matter of alliances and cohesion and collective action that this vision talks to speaks for itself. Little bits and pieces can't achieve much. Coming together can be really powerful and strong, can move many things. And finally, the treasure of Hawaii has reached here. The treasure of those words of Haumai Tawhiti have reached these shores. And over the years, particularly the last 150, 200 years, we want to reconnect with those words, because those words are the words of healing for our people in our communities. Maybe a tribe dream, but when you look at the geopolitical situations around the world, when you look at the tensions and grief here in Aotearoa, New Zealand as well, we damn well need that healing. And I know if we get this right, that healing is on the way. And if I want a change for my mokopuna and children to the future, I want to heed those words. Next, please. So, Te Arawatanga, these are all the navigating points for our canoe. They navigated from Hawaii, thousands of kilometres of sea, through all sorts of challenges, whirlpools, you know, those types of things. They made it. They made it here. A sensational journey. I worked at the museum at Tūāpapa for 6.5 years as a cultural lead. We saw so many paintings which show these Māoris arriving on the shores, destitute, skinny, what you must have bumped into this place by accident. There was no bump into this place. They were master navigators. The sea was our land. Master navigators worked up the stars, worked up the heavens. And from what I can understand, one interpretation is worked off the map of Kupe, for example, who came several hundred years before, who mapped the coastline, took it back, and those many years later, for the various reasons, Te Arawa Waka left those shores and followed the pathway of Kupe. That was an old tradition. It wasn't a written map. It was a map of stories in the landscape. Maps of ocean currents, of birds flying in the sea in proximities to land. Sight those birds and you'll know you're within 50 kilometres of land. Listen to the beat of the sea as it hits your boat, because it'll tell you what direction you're going in. Look at the stars and the relationships of those stars and you'll find your way to this promised land, Aotearoa, New Zealand. And it was obviously said there was a wife of Kupe who gave Aotearoa the name. He ao, he ao was the first thing I saw, a cloud. Then behind it, he ao Te Arawa, the long white cloud, because there was a long cloud behind the island they first saw. So as going through this, the culture, deeply part of this all. Your language, your reo, very much part of who we are. Your matauranga, your knowledge systems, and you'll hear that a lot now. Te Mana o Te Wai is all about those value constructs that dig deep into why we should preserve and value our waterways. All of those sorts of things. Te Arawatanga, the people, I've mentioned that, strengthening the people, involving them and growing them, our place, honouring Rotorua, honouring our jurisdictions, honouring our lands. And honouring it means the taiao, looking after our environment, and look at the mess we're in. I'm on the regional council as a councillor on there as well for my sins. And I have to say that the environmental challenges are huge. And can we close that gap, given the climate change and the environmental challenges? Tough going. Enterprise and economy. Te Arawa are significant landowners in this jurisdiction. There are reasons for that in historical terms. You know, Te Arawa did very well strategically in how we worked with our cousin immigrants at the time. Now, it wasn't all about that, but we ended up with quite a lot of our land. The 3,000 hectares you see around Rotorua, Ngāti Whakaue. You go out to the lakes of Rotorua, Ngāti Pikiao. You go out towards Makatu, Ngāti Mākino. You know, and it's actually large, 51,000 hectares of land in the close proximity to Rotorua, Te Arawa. $3 million of rates per year, Te Arawa. $1.2 billion asset coming around 2018, Te Arawa. However, the statistics, social statistics, not happy. So there are some real challenges in turning ourselves and our resources, not on our own, we need help, but turning our resources to our people and to our needs. And that's where you might hear some people say, what's good for Te Arawa is good for the community. And it is. If you bring that resource in, if you bring those people, those values in, and you create that value construct, if you have those values around the taiao and the environment, we can't go wrong. We're going wrong because we're deviating from those paths constantly in pursuit of the bottom line. It's time for well-being and impact investment to be considered. And that's where Te Arawa is heading to with our land trusts and corporations. Technology and innovation, oh, heck, that's out of my league. My young people, my children tell me how to turn on my phone. Well, not turn on my phone, but how to do other things on the phone. So, technology is huge, and we want to be able to establish digital hubs and technology hubs in Rotorua. We want to be able to navigate that space and expand the employment opportunities in technology. We want to use technology for the good, and right now it's the wreck and ruin of some of our young people, I think. Anyway, that's another story. Leadership and influence, Te Arawa rangatiratanga. We need these leaders to stand up. We need to succeed our next generations into leadership. Am I a leader? I guess my years might say that, but really, one of the things about leadership is you'll find that leaders who have the ability are quite humble, and humility was always a standard mark of a leader. Humility, but the ability to achieve and motivate and mobilize. So whoever can pick up these value constructs and lead it into the future, it's the next generation. We're wordsmiths at the moment. We're encouragers at the moment in my generation. I look at Tania over here. That's the generation that will take it through. And Fletcher at the back. Kia ora, Fletcher. Anyway, and the last one is unity and connection. Alliances together. You heard on Home Mai Tawhiti, go for peace. And now people say, man, there was no peace amongst Māori, you fought each other. The reality is that alliances were important in an oral tradition. And the protocols of unspoken law, LORE, were the matters of balancing your environment, balancing the tikanga, making sure you do the right thing. If you didn't do the right thing, accounting come into play and you had to pay the price. There's always these checks and balances. So you'll always find these alliances coming up during time, over that time. I would argue that Te Arawa and Māori had the ultimate accounting system, where they accounted for law, honour, LORE, honour, integrity. Break that and you're going to pay with a little bit of interest. I would argue some of the accountants that where would you find in your job description that sometimes you might lose your life if you didn't get it right. And sometimes millions of dollars have gone out the door and families have been destroyed by that very, very situation. So, next one. I'm coming to the end. So I'm really the entree for next week's presentation on a wellbeing compass that Te Arawa have developed. Wellbeing focus, meaning yes, social, cultural, environmental and commercial wellbeing, the ultimate a balancing account. So next week you're going to hear that, and with a particular focus on housing, and how do we get the balance right. Now, I'm on a couple of other boards that are commercial boards, and it is quite the challenge to break a legacy of bottom line to one of wellbeing impact investment. I remember when Te Arawa were doing a particular project, and we had our accountant there, and the project was based on wellbeing and understanding Māori, the notion of Māori, the spiritual essence of things and the values that stem from that. This particular accountant said, my God, he says, you know, yes, this is all good and well, but the bottom line is where we're at. And excuse me, but I said, well, I looked around the table and said, it's nice to see that most of us are decolonised. And I say that with all honesty, that we had to change our way of thinking and get back to the value sets that make us who we are. Understand this is where we come from, these are the values we must connect with for the future benefit of our children, our mokopuna, and for society as a whole. If the rest of the world could adopt that, we'll be all good. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa. Thank you.
Ka pai. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Te Taru, for your presentation. It has just been such an incredible journey to work alongside you and the wider Te Tātou o Te Arawa. So when we established that in 2015, the benefit that has come from their advice, their partnership has been absolutely incredible, that return on investment for our community, and they contribute so well in their role sitting on our committee meetings at the Rotorua Lakes Council too. So thank you very much for going into depth on this. I think it provides a beautiful journey and a beautiful background into why it is important for Te Arawa to not only be involved in discussions, but to be involved in that setting the vision and the goals for our community together, because as you mentioned, a very big part of our community. So we will now move into the final part, which will be the video presentation from Te Arawa Lakes Trust. So for those that aren't familiar with Te Arawa Lakes Trust, this is the entity that looks after our 14 beautiful lakes here within the Rotorua district. So Nicky Douglas has kindly presented a video presentation because she can't be here with us in person, but we'll go through that, and then if you do have any questions for the council in general, there are a number of us councillors here, our staff and our Deputy Chief Executive Jean-Paul, so hopefully we'll be able to answer any of those for you. So we'll start with our video now. Thank you.
Kia ora, my name's Nicky Douglas. I'm here from the Te Arawa Lakes Trust. This evening I'm presenting to you on Te Tūāpapa o ngā wai o Te Arawa, our cultural values framework, and just explaining, giving a brief overview of the framework, explaining how we use it strategically and operationally, and then talk a little bit about how it applies to the housing plan here for Rotorua City. Te Tūāpapa o ngā wai o Te Arawa and it originated from a piece of work in terms of meeting some of the goals of the vision and strategy for our Rotorua Te Arawa Lakes. There are 9 goals in this strategy, and goal 4 was that the lakes catchment is managed through Te Arawa values. And so the Te Arawa Lakes Trust brought together Hapu and Iwi and formed an advisory group to help inform the framework that would guide how the lakes would be managed through Te Arawa values lens. There was an approach around identifying all of the existing values that existed for the trust, such as kaitiakitanga, manaakitanga, whanaungatanga, and where the discussions got to was the identification that actually our relationship with our waters comes through whakapapa, and so a whakapapa framework was used to put together the cultural values framework for Te Arawa. As you can see here, the framework itself looks like a whakapapa, and it does articulate the origins of water, the origins of our relationship with the waters, of our lakes, our streams, our awa and our puna. And then beyond that, it articulates how that relationship can be given effect through different activities and actions. So identifying that the waters actually come from the tears of Papatuanuku and Ranginui as part of our origin story, that they're a gift to us, they're a life force. We cannot live without our waters, and therefore our connection to our lakes, our rivers, our puna is a whakapapa connection. It's one of very strong relationship. Once we had the framework and it was endorsed by our iwi and became part of the way that we would make decisions around our lakes, we also identified that it would be useful to identify what the outcomes would look like in terms of that cultural values framework. And so we put together an outcome framework that just describes what would success look like for Te Arawa, for our wider community, if Te Tūāpapa was achieving its outcomes. And we identified some performance measures that would indicate to us that we were giving effect to and implementing our cultural values framework. And the question at the bottom is anybody better off? But it does talk about the species that are in our lakes, the increase in the numbers, the impact that structures might be having on our cultural values, the involvement of hapu and iwi at a delivery level, but also at a decision-making level. So these are the outcomes really that we've identified if Te Tūāpapa was actually implemented in action. And so as a result of identifying what the measures would be, what the outcomes would look like, we went about developing He Mahere Taio, which is essentially our action plan. So it's the implementation plan for the framework. So you could say the framework sets the overall strategy and context, and then the He Mahere Taio is really the implementable actions. We have used the frame, continued to bring the framework through, Waiora, Wairua, Waiata, and then we've identified for each of those particular areas of work, what are the management actions we need to undertake. And of course, this is all underpinned by the partnership that we have with the Crown in terms of our treaty settlement and through the Te Arawa Rotorua Lakes Strategy Group, the partnership that we have in terms of the ongoing management of those lakes. And so in terms of identifying what are the particular activities or actions that we would be undertaking in respect of each of those management areas, in terms of lake health and wellbeing, you can see there that it is at some of the project work we're undertaking is through our Taru project, where we've got 8 lakes connected hydrologically, but also through whakapapa, and so identifying how we work together for the improvement of those lakes. We're also looking at, and particularly in relationship to the housing issue, so 3 waters, ensuring that the management of wastewater, stormwater and our drinking water is in line with the health and wellbeing of our lakes and rivers in terms of how that is managed. We've established a freshwater working group to support the work around the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management to ensure that Te Mana o Te Wai is upheld in line with Te Tūāpapa. Focus on our wetland restoration projects, and then we obviously are undertaking in partnership with Regional Council and Dr. Ian Kusabs the Coda Monitoring Program. And you will also be aware that we've been doing quite a bit of work around biosecurity, catfish, our catfish program, and also our aquatic weed management program that we've recently taken up the management of lake weed removal around the lakes. The second area of work, Wairua, this really relates to ensuring that our mātauranga, the traditional knowledge and practices of our whānau and the contemporary knowledge that we're developing is brought to bear in terms of the management of our lakes. One of the clear ways that has been implemented is through the Uwhi project, where we've been using in partnership with Te Rōpū Rāranga o Rotorua and Toi Te Whenua Lins, using harakeke to create mats and suppress lake weed on the lakes. And then again, the Te Mana o Te Wai ensuring that that's embedded in some of the planning and policy work currently going on at the moment. In terms of building capacity and capability, we've established Te Papa Ahurewa, our policy and planning unit, primarily established to support hapu iwi in the RM, the Natural Resource Management System. And we've also had a series of internships over the last 2 years where we've had 7 interns come through the organisation, leading to employment and also supporting them in their work through to their degree programs. In terms of climate change, adapting to a changing environment, Te Uringo Kia is our Te Arawa Climate Change Working Group. We launched our strategy at the end of last year, Te Ara Ki Kōpū, which sets out our Te Arawa response to climate change with housing, land use change, food and water security being key priorities in this area. And we've also been doing some work on a risk management framework that is informed by Te Arawa Mātauranga. Waiata, so this really is about our special places and the way that we engage in our lakes. And some of the projects we've been involved in here is ensuring where there are facilities upgrades around the lakes, the stories of our hapu iwi are represented there, the correct names are used, that there are cultural indicators, the presence of Te Arawa heard and felt and seen. So the establishment of some po in particular areas. We've had signage recently about the taking of taonga species, so our puka whakamana and the need for a permit to take koda and other species. So just making sure that there's a clear connection between the Te Arawa and their lakes and special places. We've undertaken a cultural mapping report, particularly in regard to lake structures, just to ensure that people understand when their structures are on our lakes, what potential impacts there are to cultural access and cultural sites of significance. And then we've also worked with Ngāti Te Rāwhai on Lake Okataina around a CODA project, monitoring and understanding from an access and CODA species management perspective, what the state of the CODA are in that lake. In terms of our lake structures and activities on the lakes, it really is about enabling ongoing access by Te Arawa to the lakes, supporting the ongoing use of public infrastructure, the upgrading of those facilities, to ensure that our community and our hapu iwi have ongoing access to those places, the protection of any cultural landscapes, and ensuring that any celebration that recognises our relationship and connection to those lakes with the traditional contemporary can go ahead and is supported. In terms of how does all this relate to housing, because this is why we're here today. So essentially, in terms of housing development, the Te Arawa Lakes Trust, Te Tātou and Rotorua Lakes Council jointly submitted on the recent urban intensification bill, and that really was just to ensure that whatever provisions were put in place for housing in the Rotorua urban area, that we could be engaged in a conversation about infrastructure, how the intensification would affect our waters, ensuring that the appropriate stormwater, wastewater measures are going to be put in place to uphold te mana o te wai. So in terms of our outcomes, we are we do encourage land use change where we know that there are going to be nutrient benefits to the lake. So many of you will be aware that there's a requirement to meet the 435 tonne per year target of nitrogen to our lakes. And so where land use change is able to help with the reduction of those nutrients, then the Te Arawa Lakes Trust will support that. And also seek evidence that is the case, whereby making sure that actually a housing development isn't going to be increasing nutrients. We do know that management of stormwater and wastewater is part of that, so we are engaging in some of those planning discussions to ensure that any nutrient discharge is reduced as per the plan. yeah, and as I said, stormwater and wastewater management is really important for us, because ultimately those discharges end up in our streams and to our lake. And it's not just nitrogen; there are other contaminants in that water, and we want to ensure that the contaminant level is as low as it can possibly be, if not nil. Again, under Wairua, this is about our relationship with the lake. So te mano te wai, we're working currently with Lakes Council and some of our mana whenua groups on ensuring that the te mano te wai provisions are provided for in upgrades, housing developments, and also ensuring that we are able to meet some of our climate aspirations around warmer housing or sustainable housing. That there are warmer houses, solar energy where possible, just decreasing the carbon footprint of housing overall. And then also waiata, so in any housing development, acknowledging that the land that a lot of this housing is on has at some time been under the control and ownership of our hapu and iwi, and so having their presence felt on these landscapes is really important. And also where there are sites of significance, where there are identified and known sites of cultural importance, that those are provided for in some way through housing developments. So those are the ways in which the Te Arawa Lakes Trust is applying our cultural values framework to participate in the discussion about housing. And just noting that we do have critical partnerships with both the Regional District Council and Central Government through our settlement, through the Rotorua Te Arawa Lakes Strategy Group, and through the work that has been done in the past on the housing plan. So that's probably my lot for this evening. Sorry I couldn't be there with you in person, but hopefully this has been useful to you. Te Tūāpapa and Te Ariki Kōpū, our two key strategies around water and climate, are available on our website. And I'm just going to leave you with a short video of our recent boat launch, and you can just get a sense of the relationship and the time and investment that the Te Arawa Lakes Trust is putting into the ongoing and future management of our lakes. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Right, evening everyone. As Tania introduced me before, I'm Jean-Paul Gaston. I'm the DCE of District Development at the Council. So just really in wrapping up this session, and before I hand back to Tania to conclude, we just wanted to say, well, how do these two pieces fit together? So thank you to Taru, that was wonderful for you to guide us through the Te Arawa Vision 2050. And as you've heard from Nicky Douglas too, just the really clear plan and focus that's been put in place around the efforts of Te Arawa Lakes Trust to improve water quality. So really what's critical there is that we're doing two really important sets of planning processes at the moment. So the first of those, and obviously both of them, as I've mentioned at the last talk, have been driven by our requirements under the National Policy Statement on Urban Development. So as a medium growing or Tier 2 council, we're required to start getting proactive, start getting ahead of some of the growth pressures that we're experiencing. As Tania said, this is actually a really unique opportunity for us to make sure we plan effectively for the future, to make sure sure we do get the best community we can. And as you heard from there, one that's inclusive, that's beneficial to everyone, but also sustains our environment at the same time, and is probably more importantly underpinned by our collective values as a community. So really important kaupapa as we take into this planning work. So I just signalled there's two main pieces at the moment. Is an intensification plan change, which Nicky started to talk around there, which is the introduction of the medium density standards, so allowing more homes to be built within our urban area. So that's the critical part. Now that work is underway now with a lot of consultation and a lot of engagement with mana whenua, but across Te Arawa, a lot of the framing and the thinking has already been done through the different plans that have been put in place. So for us, it's a chance now to make sure we're bringing that into these plan changes to really make sure we're underpinning some of the work we're doing around the wellbeing compass we'll talk about later, and also that future development strategy, FDS up there on the screen, to make sure we're starting to look more strategically out beyond 2050 and how the city and our community should grow. So really important planning steps at the moment. I'll just take a couple more dives into those things, and Nicky started to talk about one of them, which is the medium density standards as well. Next slide. So she briefly talked about submissions on the bill that was put into the RMA, which enabled the medium density standards to be put in place. Now, part of that was a request to be involved, and I think the strength for us as a Tier 2 council, this was mainly targeted, the medium density standards, at the big urban centres, Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, Tauranga and Hamilton. So those were the main ones that were being focused on. When the government wrote the legislation, it gave options for provincial centres that were experiencing acute housing needs to be included within those standards as well. So we saw 3 submissions come out of Rotorua, one by Te Arawa Lakes Trust, one by the Te Tato Board and the Rotorua Lakes Council. And when we made those submissions, we actually came together and sat in the same room to make those submissions online. So a really important part of that process. So that legislation has gone through, and we then followed it up by an application to be included within those medium density standards. So part of that was an assessment. So to be included, you had to be assessed as having an acute housing needs. Now, I think everyone in our community understands we do have acute housing needs, and that's translated into the problems we've got in the way of emergency housing. But equally, for those looking for different types of homes, that the speed of house construction and development in our city has lagged behind. So that's led us to this housing crisis, and obviously to the acute housing needs we currently have. So that was an assessment by government of, do we qualify to be included? And so we received back a letter from the 2 ministers who look after that piece of legislation, the RMA. So that's Minister Woods, who's the Minister of Housing and Urban Development, and Minister Parker, who looks after the Ministry for Environment. So when they wrote back to the Rotorua Lakes Council talking of our involvement, they highlighted a couple of key things there, and I think that goes to some of the messaging Taru was talking about, which is, hey, we need to start addressing a disproportional impact on Māori within our community, and the opportunity for that is to focus on that development opportunities and the potential that exists for Te Arawa to focus on their own development and to be part of those future development planning processes. So you can see also there was a very specific request to Rotorua Lakes Council that as we look at our provisions around intensification, we also look at the rules we have in place around papakainga. So a really important step for Council to bring that into that first intensification plan change process. So we've got some provisions in our current district plan which really focus in on papakainga as being permitted and enabled around marae. So really what we're looking at currently is an opportunity to say, well, actually we need to start looking more widely at the rules and the provisions that go into enabling papakainga development across the whole district, so both urban and rural. So there's some rule changes we need to look at, but equally, as Taru talked about, it's that toolkit to enable trusts and organisations to start looking at how they can actually move, particularly on multiply owned Māori land, into a perspective of where they can start developing papakainga. So an important stream of work we have going forward. The other piece of some of the work that Taru has talked about Vision 2050, is also the values that are really critically underpin our community as a whole and how we also bring that into some of the supporting documentation around intensification, and that's things like design guides. So when we start talking about development of homes and redevelopment of homes within the city, design guides provide a really good steer for those looking at investing and changing housing types, looking at sustainable development type approaches. So Nicky talked briefly then about solar, stormwater catchments, a whole bunch of those kind of issues come into that space. And some of that advice will be laid out in those design guides for people when they're looking at investing and redeveloping. Next slide. The other piece that I think is critically important, and it really goes to the work of Te Arawa Lakes Trust, was the discussion around how we look at stormwater management. Now, in my previous presentation, I just talked about how much funding has been requested from government to help us address some of the risks around flooding as we intensify, develop, and also respond to climate change. But there's another factor in here that Nicky touched on, was as actually water quality as well. And how do we bring those values and those design perspectives to this? So at the moment we've had a plan change which was to rezone Pukehangi, so that area above Pukehangi Road. So as you start looking up the Caldera between Matapo and I think down towards Mangakakihi Stream, Linton Park end. So that area has been rezoned for residential development. So currently we're developing a stormwater plan, but we're also working on a project specifically with the Te Arawa Lakes Trust on how can we look at design that's not just about the conveyancing or detention of stormwater, but actually looks at reducing nutrients and really starts enhancing the environment as well. So really trying to make sure central to some of that work is some improvements around water quality as well. So really critical, and Nicky touched on it in her presentation, that need to say, yep, housing's important, but we actually have a bunch of values and we have an environment we need to ensure that we're enhancing as well. So later on, there's a couple more talks that you'll see or hear an opportunity in more detail around that. So the work that the Te Tātou board have done around their wellness compass to really inform design guides, but also give a steer to development for Te Arawa. But equally some of the work around environmental enhancement and some of those responses to improving our stormwater network, but also making sure we're more climate resilient. So that's just a summary of how these two really important pieces of work and the partnership we have with Te Arawa will be expressed back into some of the planning work we're doing going forward. So kia ora and thank you very much.